proclaiming Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Louh, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. Such a pleasure to have all of you here with us this evening. So blessed to have my wife and co-host tonight with me. So welcome, Roxanne.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to be here with all of you.
So if you are new to Live with the Louhs, it is a show that merges both faith and psychology to kind of give you some practical steps that you can apply in your own walk of faith. We've been doing this for several years now. We just find it to be a way that really just encourages, inspires not only us, but hopefully it does the same for you. So welcome to Live with the Louhs. And also, as we're about ready to begin our topic tonight, I do want to invite you, as I do every week, just to kind of stay connected to us through our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all under the headings of The Louhs. That last name is spelled Louhs, The Louhs. And also, if you're interested in listening to our sermons, Roxanne and I oftentimes collaborate on our sermons. They're just hopefully an extension of what our shows are as well. You can find them on our YouTube channel, which is The Louhs again, and you can find all of our sermons that are archived there as well. And if you wanted to receive our daily inspirational message, I mean, there are thousands of people that receive these messages every single morning, and I just encourage you to do so if you're interested in just needing some sort of a pep in your walk, just some sort of encouragement in your walk of faith. Go to our website at thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and every day at 7 a.m., we'll send you our inspirational message for the day in your email inbox. And just a plug for our book, Renewing You, friends, especially in tonight's topic. We're going to be talking about, obviously, strengthening our marriages. And we have dedicated an entire chapter to just that, to strengthening our marriages. In fact, our very good and dear friend of Roxanne's, Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote The 5 Love Languages, a New York Times best-selling book, actually endorsed our book in large part because of the chapter that we have on marriage there. So it's just something that I hope that you'll take advantage of. You can purchase the book right here on Ancient Faith Radio. Just go to store.ancientfaith.com/renewing you. That's store.ancientfaith.com/renewing you. A lot of the topics and the tips that we're going to be sharing with you this week and next Tuesday will all be very helpful for you in your walk of faith, and you'll find them all in our book, Renewing You. And as always, friends, we'd love to hear from you. At the end of the day, I think we'd love to kind of share with you that you're part of our family, and we hope that we're part of your family. So feel free to call with a comment, a question. We'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346, or email us during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask, that's ASK, at ancientfaith.com. That's ask at ancientfaith.com. So for friends, today we're beginning a two-part podcast. This first part is entitled Strengthening Our Marriage Part 1, and then next Tuesday we'll have the follow-up. But today I really want to just lay the framework of why this topic is so important. The very first thing that we see God do in the Old Testament, as you've heard us many times talk about, is the creation of a couple, Adam and Eve. In fact, he tells us that Adam should not be alone, that he created a helpmate for him and Eve. And then we see the very first miracle that takes place in the New Testament. It takes place at a wedding, the joining of a couple. God has dreams and desires when he creates the family. In fact, he values so much the family. And you can always, as I oftentimes share with you on our show, that you can tell how important something is in someone's life by the priority they place on it. Well, God's priority in Genesis and God's priority in the Gospels was about family. We hear that already, here so vividly seen. And we hear also the words of the scriptures that the two shall become one. And then in the book of Ephesians, a beautiful book, it talks about that husbands should love your wife like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. But not only there, even the church tradition within the Orthodox Church community, it is so filled with a foundational principles about the power of the couple, the power of the husband and wife. Listen to what St. John Chrysostom says. He says, love your wife more than you love your own life. Never be at odds, but be true. Prefer her company at home over being out. And by the way, I would say that this is for both husband and wife now. Esteem and admire her publicly and advise her patiently. Pray together, go to church together, and discuss the readings and the prayers. And if your marriage is like this, St. John says this, it will rival the holiest amongst. Later on, he says, the husband and wife should be similar to the hand and to the eye. That when the hand hurts, I love this, that the eye should be crying. And when the eyes are crying, the hand should wipe away the tears. I love how important marriage was
Listen to
in the
that
families.
imagery. I mean, isn't that incredible?
And the connectivity that we hear about of
Almost like the body is connected to the mind, the husband and the wife are connected at that level.
Exactly. There's that
of
synergy
intimacy.
that we talk about so often. But, as we talk about Roxanne a lot, especially when we travel the country, and a lot of times we do retreats, marriage retreats. Just in a couple of weeks, we'll be in Sacramento, California, doing a marriage retreat. And a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a retreat, a marriage retreat in New Jersey, I think it was. But the reality is, friends, is that all of these things that God talks about, these goals that he has, and in the traditions of the church talk about how important marriage is. The reality is that in many ways, God may have a dream for our marriage, but the enemy has failures set for our marriage. And oftentimes when people hear that the enemy has these failures planned, sometimes we think of these things in the big things, infidelity, abuse, and my gosh, these things are so serious. Things that we definitely encourage if you're experiencing that not only does you speak with a therapist or a psychologist, preferably a Christian therapist, but also your parish priest to be grounded in. But as the old adage goes, the devil is sometimes in the details. So listen to this. We know that every 13 seconds, a divorce is taking place in our country. This is the highest it's ever been, by the way. The average husband and wife only spend about 3 to 5 minutes a day in quality, genuine conversation. You've heard us talk about this a lot. Only 11% of couples ever pray together. Only 11%. 50% of couples we know end in divorce, but there are some studies reflect that there are 35 to 45% of couples who are married, if they could go back in time, would not marry that person, but are staying with them, perhaps just for financial means or for the children. And most children today are born to a single parent. And on any given Sunday, there are 13 million more women that are going to church than there are men. What's my point? My point is that the devil's in the details, that sometimes we may be missing the boat. We may be so focused on the big things that we don't realize that the details that are happening in our marriage. One study found that we only spend about 4 minutes a day cleaning up after a meal. And the reason is because we're oftentimes eating by ourselves. So today I wanted to kind of share with you this two-part. One is that how do we respond? How do we strengthen our marriages? And one of the things that we have to recognize first and foremost is the fact that in order for us to have strong marriages, they have to be God-first marriages. And let me emphasize that. They need to be God-first marriages. I love the conviction by which Joshua in the Old Testament says, "As for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord." I love that resolve that he had, that it wasn't an ambiguous statement. It was something of resolve that no matter what, we're going to have a God-first family. And so the challenge that we have to ask ourselves is our families, or are our families, are they God-first families? Roxanne, we talk about this a lot, how the horizontal, the vertical relationship that we have with Christ, that vertical relationship shapes the horizontal. And I know that we talk about that a lot, that we cannot connect to our spouse if we're not first connected to Christ.
I mean, right. I mean, this is where our choices, when we're connected to Christ, become really so much more inspired by our relationship with Him rather than just our relationship with our moment to moment feelings toward our spouse. Because as we all know, relationships go through so many cycles, positive, negative. We don't always feel fondness toward our spouse. And so it is through relationship that we sort of begin to gain the mindset of Christ, because it's not always easy to love people in moments where they're not acting lovable, right? But as we kind of stay close to Christ, stay grounded in Christ, we start to see that our love gets closer to sort of that biblical love that we hear about, the sacrificial, the unconditional, the freely given, right? So we're not waiting for our partner to do the right thing before we do the right thing. And in a sense, I sort of see our marriage as sort of becoming a form of serving God rather than just our feelings. So we're sort of more God-serving than self-serving in our relationship. So we're here to preserve unity, to operate out of goodness, to pursue right, and really to look to serve God at every opportunity rather than to just serve ourselves in that marriage. And that's really when I would say we start really fighting for and supporting the well-being of our spouse, right? Not just the well-being of our position.
Exactly. And I know that in our own marriage, I think that, like any marriage, we have our own sets of struggles and our own set of challenges that individually we face, as well as struggles that we face as a couple. And I think one of the things that I've always found that has kind of grounded us, even though when sometimes our egos kind of get in the way and that we feel like, oh, this is what I have to do, or these are my strong feelings, is this coming back to who's the lighthouse? Who's the one guiding this relationship? Because I think on our own, the two of us, and I think this is true for all couples, or I think couples that are much more aware of themselves, would say that on our own, we tend to kind of go to what we feel. Like we think that what we believe and we're strong and we feel so strongly about it that sometimes, we can win, as the old adage goes, that we can win the battle, but we're losing the war. In other words, we're destroying our relationship because we're so defined into what we believe in. And if you don't have that kind of connectivity to Christ, kind of who's the designer of marriage, be the definer of our life, then just like on an individual basis, our own marriages will struggle as well. And no more do we see that than in the busyness that we're seeing in our world. We talk about this a lot, but all of us are so busy. Individually, as families, I know in our own life, Roxanne, we do our set of traveling on our days off. We tend to travel and do retreats after we've done our work here at the parish, just to try to make a difference in our church and in the lives of people. But we also, when we're home, we have our children that are young or teenagers. We're trying to make sure that they're doing well, that they get their time with us. But I really think that one of the great desires of the enemy is to make us so busy in our life that we don't have time to spend first and foremost with God in our life. And I really would love to hear from you, when you're seeing the couples that come to you for counseling, especially those that are looking for spiritual counseling and Christian counseling. How do how often is it that busyness becomes a major problem in their relationship?
This is sort of one of the common threads of as you said, of the enemy, right? And I think so often it's in our business that we really stop pursuing Christ. And when we stop pursuing Christ, we often stop pursuing our spouse. I really feel that they're very linked, because when we sort of fall out of our own relationship with Christ, we lose the peace in our own heart that sort of institutes or gives birth to the joy and to the celebration and to the laughter and to the curiosity and to all the beautiful things that sort of breed connection, because we ourselves don't feel at peace in order to have that connection. And so I often find that through the busyness, as we lose relationship with Christ, we lose that connectivity to our faith, we often very well stop pursuing the people that are standing right before us.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the church fathers, I think it was St. Maximus, that said that whenever there's no prayer and there's no fasting, there are where the demons live. And, in many ways what he was saying is that when we don't make time for God is when the enemy tends to go obviously more at work in our lives. We do invite you to call in or send us an email if you're wanting to get some tools or just maybe have a comment about what works great in your own life with strengthening your marriage. We'd love to hear from you. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346, 1-855-237-2346, or feel free to email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
And I want to just sort of echo, that one other piece of, I think, what happens when we sort of lose that connectivity with our faith that I often see, the way that impacts, couples is, not only do we sort of lose that sort of positivity and all those positive emotions that give birth to connection, but it also sort of seems to set up what I often see as this sort of negative relationship cycle where arguments happen more easily because we're building negative narratives about each other, right? So, things that we're usually able to sort of overlook, we tend to then start thinking about, brooding about, and that kind of promotes a feeling of resentment or just sort of agitation, and then that promotes distance, right? And then the distance leads to us arguing more over little things, right? And then arguing more kind of leads to forgetting what we like about each other. And then that, forgetting what we like fuels more distance and disconnection, which makes it easy to fight more. So, we start to see this very negative cycle that oftentimes is rooted in this just incredible busyness that leaves us stressed and kind of less than our best. And it does affect our narratives about our partners.
Absolutely. And we oftentimes say this, that the enemy will always speak the loudest. And we kind of use several different ESTs, if you will. Or, in other words, he'll speak the loudest when we're the loneliest, when we're the tiredest.
Absolutely.
And when you're tired, as we all know it, and God knows we've been guilty of this ourselves, is that our emotions are all over the place. We sometimes will overcompensate, as you're mentioning, Roxanne. I mean, sometimes we'll see ourselves kind of get angry at things that really are not really worth the argument, but we'll make it an argument because we're just tired. And then you see we will sin more. We'll say things that, and especially in conflict, that we would never say, or do things that we would never do, simply because the enemy is attacking us. And then finally, when we're angry, the last thing we want to do is hear God, because I oftentimes share this with people that God always gives us a warning sign before we do something negative. I think he always kind of gives us some sort of just an awareness, and depending on which volume is speaking louder at that moment, oftentimes it's the rage, the anger, the tiredness, whatever, the loneliest, whatever those emotions that are going on, oftentimes they'll speak louder than God's voice. And as such, we don't hear God saying, let's be forgiving, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, let's show mercy, grace. Those are the kind of things. So it's
and we don't go to him because we feel shame when we don't feel those things, right? So
right.
It's a level of dissonance. We don't like to experience that level of inconsistency too. So it then makes it easier to stay disconnected, in our faith, and what a spiral it really creates.
And so unfortunately, I think for a lot of couples, Roxanne, thankfully they're going to, psychologists and therapists and priests, but for the majority of them, many of them are not. And that's really what we hope that this show will at least give you a little opportunity to kind of just help your marriage grow, and just even the smallest of ways, by listening to our show. So if we're talking about, just the busyness, let me just share with you just how busy we are becoming. Before the invention of the light bulb, the average American would get 11 hours of sleep. And I know that sounds like such
wow. 11 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that right now people are like going 11 hours. Now people are getting on average about 7 hours. And I think for many of us, we'd be like, wow, 7 hours would be great. As I mentioned earlier, the average dinner cleanup time is only 4 minutes. Much of that is due to the fact that we're eating by ourselves. And then the average American is taking, these are all worst, these statistics are revealing, are at their worst. The average American family takes less than 7 days vacation. And then genuine quality time as a couple is at an all-time low at about 4 minutes a day, and just genuine, not responsibilities, but simple, genuine conversation with one another. And so the argument that we would say is, what would God be telling all of us to do in a world that's telling us to speed up? For many of us, we have kind of bought into this lie that more is better, that we need to continuously stay busy. That's also in the church world as well. We see that when there's no kind of finish lines, if you will. And I think God tells us throughout Scripture about the importance of slowing the pace so that we can enjoy the grace of our spouse. Like slow, because our days are numbered together. It reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha. We hear this very powerful message that many of you have all heard of countless times, but here we have Martha sitting in the kitchen. She's the older sister. She's working in the kitchen. Her sister Mary is sitting at the side of, right next to Christ. And back in those days, if a Jewish man was speaking, there would never be an interruption as they were speaking. It was considered to be impolite. But Martha gets so frustrated by the fact that her sister is not helping her in there. She's not involved in the busyness of what was going on at that time, that she interrupts the conversation. She interrupts Christ's teaching to tell him in front of the others that, Jesus, look at my sister. I'm doing all this work. I'm so busy, and no one is helping me with that. And I love Jesus' response. He not only calls her name once, but he calls it twice, as if to really get her attention. He says, Martha, Martha, you are so busy doing so many different things. And I love this phrase that he says, but only one thing is needed. What is that one thing? It's just to kind of first and foremost, be still with me. And so I really want to kind of give you just some practical ways to strengthen your marriage in 3 of these little focuses that I'd love for you to do. First is that as a family and as an individual, I would say that focus on less is more. We are bought into this world that we have this desire to continuously acquire. Many people, sadly, are operating outside of their financial means. In fact, studies are reflecting that we're spending 128% of our salary. So many people are operating in debt. We only use about 20% of our clothes that we see in our closets, which for a lot of people, the question would be is why aren't we using that clothes to make a difference in the world? But the reality is that there's always this desire to hoard, to consume. In fact, I heard someone say that consumption has surpassed Christianity as a religion. In other words, for a lot of Christians, we're so focused on consumption over compassion, over hoarding, as opposed to helping. But I want you to realize that none of that stuff on the outside will ever give us God's peace that we need on the inside. Listen to what the book of Proverbs says. It says, a heart at peace gives life to the body. A heart at peace gives life to the body. It is better to only have a little with peace of mind than to be busy all the time. It's found in the book of Ecclesiastes 4, verses 6. And, Roxanne, I'd love to kind of hear just how, how important it is to just simply allow yourselves to be happy and be where you are. Because I think so often one of the initiators of this behavior is the comparison game. We compare ourselves to what other people have. Obviously, social media does that a lot. It triggers a lot of those unhealthy emotions in us. But how often do you see that in the practice? And also, what do you kind of share with our listeners about ways that they can kind of just be happy with where we are right now? Aim for things, but be happy with where you are.
So I'd love to get into that. And I think there's a lot I have to say about that, actually, in terms of just sort of slowing down. But I think it really comes to that moment of reflection in your day where you ask yourself, what am I prioritizing? Mm-hmm. And is that a priority? What am I prioritizing? And is this a priority? Mm-hmm. Because not everything we assign as a priority is truly a priority. Mm-hmm. And in the power of stopping and engaging and directing our attention into our present, into just what's in front of us. As Jesus said, to Martha, hey, what Mary's doing, that's what matters. Well, what was Mary doing? I mean, in essence, she was connecting. Mm-hmm. She was engaging. She was mindfully present. Mm-hmm. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't multitasking, as we would call it today. She wasn't doing 75 other things. And as much as I think that is a reminder of our connectivity to Christ, it's also a reminder of our connectivity, to each other. Mm-hmm. And so all the priorities that we're really chasing, I think it does sort of come back to, and it's often what I ask people to reflect on is to stop and pay attention and to make that sort of subconscious process very conscious, where we decide, is this really what I need to be doing in this moment?
I love that. We again invite you to join the conversation tonight. Share a comment, a question. You can obviously do this anonymously as well. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855 237-2346, or you can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. We're talking tonight about how to strengthen our marriages, and the number one way to strengthen our marriages is to first put back Christ on the throne of our marriages, to be God-first marriages and God-first families. And so number one, I said to you about, focus on simply being okay with what, focus on really what matters most, and not on focusing on more on the less, not on the more that we see so often being told that we need to get. But another thing that I would say is, in addition to focusing on what is on things that are less in our life, is number two is focus on really what has the most significance. In other words, what are the things that matter the most in our lives? And Roxanne was beautifully sharing this, but I think that one of the things that we would say first of all is that if I'm going to focus on things, it needs to be that less is better, less is more, if you will, but also that I would make sure that I'm focusing on having a deeper relationship with Christ. In other words, going deeper in my walk of faith every single day. And we call this the rule of 15s, that every day, non-negotiable, that we would spend, 15 minutes, 5 minutes with prayer, 5 minutes of reading the Bible, 5 minutes of reading a daily devotional. That's actually one of the reasons why we send these daily devotionals, is kind of just to help with you with this, but to give you 15 minutes of non-negotiable to say, God, be back on the throne in our marriage. Be the one who's guiding our marriage. I think also, in addition to just kind of taking those times there to really connect to Christ and be purposeful about that, it allows us to hear Him more. Sometimes people say to me, Father Nick, I just can't hear God anymore. I can't hear God in my marriage anymore. And I oftentimes tell them this in a respectful way. I tell them this, but the reality is that if we can't hear God, guess who moved? We did. We tend to move away from Him. And so this Sunday we're going to give a sermon series on the book of Daniel. And one of the things I was going to share with the congregation is that, whenever we go away from God, just like the prodigal, we'll end up in a pig's pen. We'll end up leaving what God desired for us to do. And if God made marriage such a priority and family such a priority, then so should we. So focusing on what matters most means, number one, I want to focus on having my relationship with Christ and the church grow. I would say number two is that I focus every day on how I'm, as Roxanne was mentioning earlier, how do I fulfill my purpose? Like, you're not some random act in history. The Bible says that Christ created us while we were still in our mother's womb. In other words, you didn't get life when you were outside the mother's womb. You were given life when you were in the mother's womb. That's when life begins. And so it's so important to recognize that God had a purpose and a plan for you from the very, very beginning. And the importance of us is to remember the words that we hear about in the book of Acts, that my life will mean nothing to me unless I use it for finishing the work that God assigned me to do. So ask yourself, in those moments every day, am I truly focusing on how God is yearning for me and my family to be difference makers in this world? As you all know, in the Orthodox wedding service on multiple occasions is this reminder that God is blessing us so that we can be a blessing to other people. He says, bless them as you blessed Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah. And then he says, so that they can go and have so much in their homes, that their homes would be so filled with blessings that they would be able to give to those who are in need. So God shares that with us. So number one, again, is...
So ultimately, I think that's important to capitalize on. What you're saying is that this synergy of sort of having come together has a greater purpose in terms of our relationship being able to serve. And being able to do something in this world as a result of having been in connection with each other. And so if we're not filling ourselves in Christ, we do stop pursuing one another, and we actually stop as a unit pursuing our connectivity with the world around us.
Absolutely. And the final part I just wanted to share before we we've got some email questions coming in is that we also focus in on stillness. I love how, when we look at the life of Christ, Roxanne, how often we see Him just retreating to that stillness. And how many couples, I think, would say that we need to simply just be still sometimes. I loved how, we came home today and we were just still with each other. I just love that inserting that time together. And I think how so many couples, oftentimes the televisions are on or there's other things that we're trying to do or accomplish, but that unity, that beautiful time together to where we're just still with each other and ultimately still with God.
Absolutely. And, I think it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be long. I mean, stillness can be, 5 to 10 minutes, deciding to sit outside, taking an extra long walk to go get the mail. I mean, these are small snippets of time that contribute to the stillness and the solitude that we are looking for, and we have to take it where we can get it. And so it is important to focus in on that, and it also helps us sort of hear what's going on in our own soul as we relate to our spouse, because so much of that sentiment is not always conscious, or we're not always aware of it. And sometimes it often in stillness, a lot of that stuff sort of comes to the surface that may be unhealthfully affecting our relationship with people around us.
I love that. We invite you again, give us a call or send us an email question. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346, or you can email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. I know, Roxanne, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. If you want to, there's one question that came in earlier today. It said, will you touch on the topic of empty nesters? We have a lot of friends entering into this season, and it is very textbook. Do we still like each other? What do we have in common? And some are contemplating divorce, while others are contemplating counseling. And I think, Roxanne, for a lot of people, so much of their attention was raising their children for such a long period of time, and that became their life. And then once their children are no longer in the home, it's just the two of them, that's where oftentimes we can see conflict. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
And sure. And this is a really common, stage. Listen, stages of life really do change us. And, we are not the same people before losing a spouse, after losing a spouse, before a child, after a child, before teens, after teens, and also when children leave the home. It changes us. And I do think that there is a sort of an individual grieving that happens that we have to support each other in. And that's really different, but it is so important that we talk about that. Where I see couples really struggling as empty nesters is we are not talking about our experience of this loss. And in fact, maybe we're projecting onto each other what we should be feeling about it. And I find that many people see it quite differently. And so if we are not connecting around our experience, we are experiencing it alone. And in that sort of is a loneliness. And that just amplifies the physical now loneliness that we have of children leaving the home. And what I often find is it's a major identity shift,
right.
Not only for individuals as mom and dad, but also as a couple, because, once we were sort of domestic partners responsible for managing, human beings and in a busy home. And now we're not doing that. So we have a big job responsibility that's gone. And one of the things we have to really think about is, who were we before having children? How did I used to enjoy spending time before I had children, before I was married? What were the activities that made me feel like me? How did I replenish? Did I used to go on bike rides or lunch dates with friends? Did I go to the library and just read, because I was curious or convicted about a topic? Did I have philosophical discussions with people, go to bookstores or get involved in volunteer work? I think, oftentimes when we become sort of domestic partners in sort of raising human beings, there is very little time to engage in the identity of who God really designed us to be. And so we have to kind of set that aside in order to sort of produce, good humans in the world. But there is a beautiful chapter that I think can be reborn in us when children leave the home and we get back to those individual convictions that God has placed on our heart, and we begin to sort of pursue those passions, pursue positive emotion, really start to set our lives up around the experience of positive emotion. If we want to experience amusement, we surprise our spouse. If we want to experience the connection to beauty in the world. We go and we watch the sunset, all these sorts of things that life doesn't really allow when you have to sort of devote this energy toward children. So there is a rebirth of our identity as a human being, but we're kind of just getting back to, things that may have already been there. And so I would say we really have to be talking about it, but we really have to kind of be a little curious and mindful of who we were, prior to children, and being intentional about trying to set our lives up around the experience of those positive attachments.
Right. And I think it's so important too that, we see this a lot just in marriage counseling, is that, one of the big areas of or very, very big turbulent times that we face in marriage is after the first child is born. That becomes a very challenging time, that in the euphoria of having this child, obviously the responsibility, sometimes the sleepless nights, the difficulties that come along with it. Obviously, these are all blessings that we talk about, but there's still labor that's involved with it. But I think what happens is that people forget to have fun. They forget to just simply enjoy, so that they spend the next 18 years spending so much time trying to really raise the child as they should, but also at some ways at the expense of just simply enjoying each other's company, getting to know each other, laughing, spending those date nights with one another, asking each other how each other's day are doing, and really, and sincerely wanting to know how those days are being. I think it's so important that, it's also just to make sure that we're having fun and enjoying that.
I think we have to be really curious about each other too. I mean, I do think that happy couples are very inquisitive of each other, and they don't assume how their partner is experiencing anything. They assume that life changes their partner, and they're constantly sort of wanting to be engaged with how that stage of their life has changed them. And I think, as couples get older, and I don't know if you see this, Nick, but I certainly do, that we start to talk more about what we're doing than how we're doing. We're not really sharing our innermost thoughts. We stop sharing our dreams or our hopes for the future. I had one patient say, she went to visit a friend, and her friend was talking about the fact that she and her husband were dreaming of one day, they were going to own a mountain home. They were going to travel the world. They were going to learn to sail. And she looked at me and she said, my husband and I don't dream anymore. We don't discuss our dreams, and I want to dream again. And, I said, well, it's because you've raised children for the last 20 years. And this is something that sort of we get to revisit. And so I do think we sort of come together and we decide to be inquisitive. And we decide to start sharing what we want our next chapters, to really look like.
I love that. Roxanne, we have another email question actually a question that came in through the YouTube channel. And it says this. It says, I have listened to my wife a while until finally listened to her on Sunday morning. How do I emotionally support my wife when a lot of the situations that she has faced, I haven't?
Oh, wow. I will say that Carl Rogers once said that when someone really hears us without passing judgment, without trying to take responsibility for us, and without trying to mold us, it just feels really good. And, I don't know that we always have to have had a similar experience to our partner to be able to be present with them as they explain it. We certainly can't be present all the time, but at some point each day, we should look up at our spouse and listen with our eyes, bringing our attention to just that moment, and really ask ourselves, what is going on with my spouse in this moment? How are they doing really? And I think that's the moment where we monitor our distractions. We put down everything else. And, we don't interrupt what they're sharing with us because of our own competing thoughts about what they're sharing. And I would say, really trying to just mirror those emotions, so if they're concerned, you're showing concern. If they are rejoicing about something, you are celebrating with them. And show interest, rather than saying, oh, well, that's nice. Or, oh yeah, same here. We're not just nodding in agreement. We're asking questions, and we're connecting in a way that says, hey, tell me more about that. And you're asking questions that help them deepen and savor the experience. What made that so hard? Tell me more about that. Why was that so rough? Because I think if we can kind of join them in whatever they're experiencing and get them to talk about it, and we emotionally connect and we just hear, that's enough to create connection. We don't have to say something profound. We don't even have to fully understand it. In fact, we want to ask enough questions until we think that we do. I mean, that's sort of the whole process, right? It's just getting them to expound. And it is that connection of somebody joining us in whatever emotional space we're in that really gives birth to emotional connection and relieves the stress and the angst that somebody is feeling alone. And actually, interestingly enough, I mean, we were designed to mimic each other. When I talk about mirroring emotions,
right.
we were designed to synchronize our facial expressions because we were designed to carry people's emotions, right? So if we're not distracted, we should be doing that by our own biology.
I love that. And, I just kind of reminds me of just how in everything that we're doing that, as we see in the scriptures, it talks about, that the two become one, that we literally become just in every facet of our life, the love, our thoughts, our dreams, that when we come together as one. And then the scriptures also talk about the importance of us recognizing that we are supposed to lead each other in our salvation, lead each other towards Christ. So I think, Roxanne, as we've been talking, I think if we're putting numbers on this, I mean, not to kind of make this so simplified, but just to kind of guide our viewership tonight, I think that number one would be that if we want to strengthen our marriages, we have to have God-first marriages. Our marriages have to be centered on the God who designed them, and let Him be the one that defines our marriages. But with that being said, as we go further than that, is pursuing the good. And I really want to kind of allow just to kind of share some of these things and how significant that is to pursue the good.
I mean, research has found that what we're seeing is that the quality of our friendship in a marriage is literally 50% of the equation of navigating conflict well. And in part 2, we're going to be talking about conflict next week. But, if we have not pursued the good, we aren't very motivated in conflict to repair anything because we don't really have anything worth getting back to.
Right.
If I can't remember the last time we sort of had positive momentum, positive feelings, positive memories, positive connection. In conflict, I don't really feel the need to do anything to sort of close the space and gap between us. And even this positive momentum that we create by pursuing each other in these sort of positive times, it also improves our thought life about each other, even in the midst of what could be conflict, right? So we are much more likely to give each other the benefit of the doubt rather than sort of taking offense at something if we've been actively feeding the friendship all along. It's that friendship that really eases all the small tensions that could otherwise lead to frustrations and fighting. And so the friendship is really what helps us start to see each other's inherent good again. And we start to really respect our partner, we admire them, and we feel inspired by them. And so what we start to see is this sort of virtuous cycle happening where I see you're good, I'm inspired to do good towards you, and doing good towards you inspires your good. So we start to see a good of the marriage, kind of doing good in the world. So the friendship piece is incredibly important. So relationships really require like 2 really important superpowers, right? We have to know how to handle conflict, which is again next week. But we really have to know how to pursue and create a solid friendship that protects our relationship from the common enemy that we face, which is division. And so I really feel like as human beings, God blessed us with connection, right? And, He blessed us with whoever He put in our life to lead us, to change us. And this is true even for people who have lost their spouse. I look at our moms and I know that they are changed by having been with our dads. And because they were loved, they were supported, they were appreciated, they were valued, they were encouraged. And guess what? As iron sharpens iron, they needed those people to speak life into them because it changed who they became. And I think that so often that's how we have to look at our marriages. Why did God give me you? Like, why did He give me her or him? As I look at our own life, Nick, I think, can't help but think like divinely orchestrated. Like I needed you for X, Y, and Z. I could go down the list of how you've changed me. And I believe, that he gave me to you in order to sort of strengthen some sort of synergy that he wanted us to kind of use for his good and his glory. And so, but I think sometimes we get so caught up, in our day-to-day lives that we really forget to be sort of caught up in each other, in the blessing of who is in our life and who's been in our life, and how that person was placed in our life in order to create, something for our future. And so, in pursuing this kind of momentum or friendship, I want you to think about something. When your spouse walks in the room, do you naturally look up? Do you get up? Do you walk over to them? Do you open up conversation? Do you put down your laptop, put down your phone? Do you turn away from the television? Or do you continue doing right on what you're doing and kind of wave from the side? And listen, if that's you, that's okay. That's we understand why. But this is the moment today when that changes, because we're making you conscious of the fact that, when someone comes home, from work and we choose to see them and we greet them, we give life to their soul. If they're heavy burdened, we remove some of that burden because we say, hey, I see you and I'm happy to see you. And happier couples, they tend to reach out to each other often. And they tend to respond to that reaching out about 86% of the time.
I love that. I think it's so powerful. And it goes in line, Roxanne, with a question that we just received, an email question that we received. It says, what are ways to celebrate the joys of marriage? What have you done in times of joy? What activities have brought you closer to God in that joy? And I think that's just, kind of going back to that sometimes we think it's the big things that do that. But, for me, I know on a personal level, there's nothing that lights me up more than right after liturgy on a Sunday, as I'm on my way to go and meet and spend time with our parish family and our church family, is to see you and to get, just to hear, to talk to you, to acknowledge, to greet the first church, in our family at least, and that's you, and just to have that connectivity, or when I come home from work, and having those times, or our Friday nights, our date nights, or our movie nights. So I would tell for me at least, I don't, Roxanne, I would imagine that you're probably the same way, but for us, it's all in the small things. I think we love to be unpredictable in the way in which we show love towards each other. And I oftentimes tell people this when we travel and do marriage retreats, is that, what I have found is that the most successful marriages are unpredictable marriages. They show they're predictable on their morals, their values, their core teachings, their mission as a family, but they're unpredictable how they show their love. They're constantly doing things that just express love in a different way. Even today when I came home, Roxanne knows that I love plants, and so she went and bought something that I really been wanting to have in our house. It's just those small things that really kind of uplift and inspire me. And so I just share that with you all, that with the emailer, that doesn't oftentimes have to be the big things. It's the little love letter that goes into the lunchbox. It's a little smile that kind of comes in there again.
I mean, think back to what makes you laugh, what makes you relax. Couples who regularly spend time sort of just doing novel and exciting things together enjoy much higher quality marriages. And here I always like to kind of give the caveat that the things that you do together with your spouse should not be about competition. Okay, they should be about connection. So we don't want to take our partner to play tennis when we've been a pro tennis player, and they're just trying to learn. The goal is to have fun. And so you want to cook together from scratch, even if you're both terrible at cooking. You want to stay up late watching old movies or a new series or documentary you find interesting, or maybe share a book or read a book that sort of defined your partner growing up, and then talk about it. Start a garden together, a home project. Try something new, hiking or biking. I was talking to somebody in Spin the other day, and she said, we've just started hiking, and now we're going on mountains. We just hiked through the Grand Canyon, and it's like sort of their new adventure. They had never hiked a day in their life, and here they are at 55 and 60, and that's what they're doing. And if you don't have a playful side, again, try a game, try dancing in the kitchen. I mean, I think there are so many reasons we stop having fun as as sort of domestic responsibilities sort of overtake our lives. But the idea of having fun and sort of building in new and novel experiences with our partners, sort of what builds that friendship. It's the being able to laugh with each other and laugh at each other and with each other that makes it so fun. And, I think that so much in this process, we do forget, as you said, Nick, so beautifully, it is all these small things. It is all the small things. Like if your partner loves coffee and there's a new coffee shop in town, like go get them their favorite drink. That's it. And have it waiting for them on the counter when they come home. Being generous with sort of small acts of giving. When you're out and you see something they would want, like bring it home. And being generous with positive words. I mean, I do think that a lot of times we think about what we like about our spouse, but we don't always say it, right? I might think about something I was grateful for, but I may forget to actually extend that gratitude verbally. And so I would ask you, when was the last time that you looked at your spouse with admiration for what is good about them instead of what frustrates you? And when was the last time you really, truly thought about, what do I love most about them? Like, why did God put them in my life? And have I shared those things recently? Because I really do think, God desires for us to love, to value, to appreciate one another, to sharpen each other. And we do that through the marital relationship. And that's really how we give him glory, right? As we strengthen, when we move our spouse to see their good and we help them see their good, I believe that, their God-given gifts are, they're made more confident in those things, right? And that helps them go out and do things, in the world that God designed for them to do as well.
And, remembering as well that relationships never stay where they're at. They're either growing or they're dying. And that's why for many of us, we've got to be asking ourselves, not waiting for the other person to act, because so often we do that, whether it be in conflict, whether it be in showing and expressing love. I've heard someone tell me recently that, Father, I'm always the one doing this. I'm always the one doing that. I would say do it one more time. Continuously to show that level, that overture of love. Because again, your vertical relationship with God, going back to the first area that we talked about, shapes that horizontal. And so the more that we're able to kind of continuously speak words of hope, to teach them through our own life, about the importance of loving one another and expressing that actually in doing it, it challenges us to take the marriage to a whole new level. And the scriptures talk about that. The scriptures talk about the importance of going above and beyond. St. John Climacus says, climb, always be climbing. And he's talking about this obviously in our personal journey through life, but you could definitely use that also in a marriage where you're constantly climbing the next step. He's the author of The Ladder of Divine Ascent, that I'm climbing to the next area. What is the next step in your marriage? What are some of the areas that you would say, hey, let's take this next step together as a couple, God willing, to continue to strengthen that marriage?
So one of the comments came in and says, so what you're saying it really is to sustain and maintain the friendship with your spouse. Absolutely, yes. And our partners need to know how we feel about them. So when you think it, say it. When you feel love, express it. And really think about complimenting people's God-given gifts. What unique strengths you think God has equipped them with. Because listen, people tend to cultivate things they've been noticed for. So, see it as I'm going to serve God. Like even if my partner hasn't complimented me in a very long time, I'm going to serve God by complimenting them and bringing out something in them that I think God has designed them with. You could say something, the way you treat people is inspiring to me. Your confidence is something I aspire toward. Or you have a way of making me feel like I belong. Or I admire your passion for, this cause or that conviction, or your resilience motivates me in my own difficulty. This is the type of sort of deeper gifts that we're looking to complement, to sort of bring out in our spouse, because this is, that is part of the reason we're given to each other, is to make each other better. And that breeds a positive connection that we have toward them that makes us want to love, even in the tougher times, because we're reminding ourselves of what they're great at.
Well, and it kind of goes to the old adage that many of us have heard many a time, and that is that if you want to have something that you haven't had in a while, you have to be willing to do something that you haven't done in a while. You have to be able to take on that ownership yourself. And so, as we've been talking about, there's never one quick, easy fix. Marriage is a journey. It's a beautiful journey that we take together. And there's, as St. John Chrysostom was saying, we talked about at the very beginning, it's like to where you're constantly becoming this synergy, this inseparable union that when you're feeling the emotion, the other, your spouse is taking the napkin to wipe away the tears. I mean, there's that level of love and compassion. And so I just would encourage you that as you're hearing this tonight, I know it's easy to go, it's tempting, I would say, that maybe to say, well, my spouse is the problem. And I just would kind of take a step back and say, okay, ask yourself, let this start with me. Let this conversation that we had tonight with all of you, let it start with me. Let me first ask myself, do I have God in my own life in a way that resembles the way He would want it? If I'm in a relationship with God, is my marriage to Him, do I reflect that in the way in which I act towards Him? I'm praying to Him, I'm reading about Him, I'm reading messages about Him. I mean, do I have a God-first marriage in my own personal life? And then second of all, as Roxanne was saying, is pursuing the good, looking for every opportunity to pursue the good in everyone that we are, in every way that we're communicating with our spouse, and making sure that they see Christ in us. I think it's so important that we're doing that on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, listen, we want the good times with our partner to become so prevalent, so abundant, so fresh in our memory that they make any negative thought that comes to mind or any negative potential experience seem totally insignificant. That's what we're looking for. That's the quality of the friendship. I mean, you think about Philippians 4:8, the verse of, think about what's lovely, what's pure, what's noble, what's admirable, and what's praiseworthy. But if we haven't spent time cultivating positive momentum in friendship with our partner, we are relying on willpower to think about what is pure and lovely and admirable about them. Right.
I can't help but think, Roxanne, in the last moments of our show tonight, that I had a couple that came into my office, this was several years ago, that basically were saying to me, Father Nick, all we just want is we just want to be happy. We just want to be happy. And that's what God wants. God wants us all to be happy. That's what they were saying to me. And I said to them, no, God doesn't want you to be happy. He wants you to be holy. Because once you are working towards that holiness, then you can truly experience true happiness or true joy. Because if we're not, we'll have these one-offs, we'll have a date night here or go out, on a vacation once a year and we get that kind of picker-upper for, a couple of days. But then we go back to those default settings in our marriage where we're not spending time, we're so busy with stuff, and we're not recognizing that we are called to be set apart. Holiness means to set apart myself from what is, what's there. And so, although we're in this world, we're not of this world. And so, as the challenge is constantly cultivating your own personal walk of faith through the sacraments, through the church traditions, through the reading of scriptures and prayer, all that we've been talking about, to set yourself apart so that you could be the partner that your partner needs.
Yeah. So we are doing this. We are breathing life into this soul in front of us, not because they breathed life into me just 10 minutes ago, but because God breathed life into me 10 minutes ago. So that's sort of always how I'm in a, looking at it. It's like, what you've done for me is my job toward others, and I encourage you, if you have time, to go back and look at Psalm 138 about how God knows us, our waking up, He discerns our thoughts from afar. He knows words on our tongue before they were there, that's how God knows us. And that's how we're called to know our partners. And so it takes a lot of just paying attention to them, really seeing them, really putting away things that aren't priorities, and really taking that time to spend engaged and quality, mindfully connected time, as Mary was doing with Jesus. And I like to just say, as a small rule of thumb for quality time, life is busy, but 15 to 30 minutes daily is usually what's recommended, where we are just like I said, that's a walk, that's a cup of tea outside. That's what we did this afternoon when you went in the garden and you were watering the plants and I stood there with you. Like that's a 15 minutes. That's our quality time. Something bigger weekly, maybe 2 hours, that may be a dinner outside in your backyard together, or it may be a date night out. It doesn't have to be fancy, but something once a month that's a little bigger, maybe a whole day together where we, spent the day doing something. And then, even that 15 minutes daily could be like we really prioritize our partings, our reunions at the end of a day, showing appreciation for a few minutes each day, giving a little bit of affection, coming into the kitchen to help each other. When somebody's really tired, we're just joining them and helping in all those small moments. That's part of that 15 to 30 minutes, that all is like investing into this account of friendship. And the last thing I'll say about quality time is date night is not your state of the union. That's not the time to map out your schedules, to cover everything you haven't dealt with in your schedule, or to go over all the things you're upset about. Date night is just your quality time. State of the union is something totally different that you should also have, each week.
I love that. I hope that what we've shared with all of you tonight has been something that's been very beneficial and helping you to strengthen your marriage. And as always, we encourage you, we're going to do part 2 next Tuesday. So if you have any questions or comments, definitely email them to us. We'd love to hear from them. Definitely we'll ask those during the show. I also want to just take this opportunity to thank all of you for being here with us and to invite you to receive our daily inspirational messages on our website, and also to subscribe to our Louhs YouTube channel, where we have all of our sermons that I give on a daily, every Sunday, that I've been doing for years and years. So I definitely encourage you to check out those sermons on our YouTube channel, which is the Louhs. And finally, everyone, next Tuesday we'll continue this conversation. But I want to thank Matushka Trudy for always doing an amazing job in producing tonight's show. She just does an extraordinary job in all the great work that they do at Ancient Faith Radio. God bless you all, my friends, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.